What's up, guys? So I was hanging out at my apartment and I got a knock at the door, and it was two religious gentlemen. I invited them in to have a little chat. They agreed that we could record it. So here we are. I'm excited. I've never done anything like this. Neither has he on camera. So we're just going to have a conversation, a nice little exchange of ideas, and we'll see where it goes. So I hope you guys enjoy. So what's your name?
Javion.
Yes. What is it?
Javion.
Javion. Yes. Awesome. And your name?
My name is Brandon.
Brandon. Awesome. It's mostly going to be me and Javion talking throughout the time, but Brandon might jump in every now and then.
Yes.
So I'll let you have the floor. What do you want to talk about today?
So I'm from the World Mission Society Church of God, and we just go around inviting people for a Bible study because most people don't know about God nowadays. Actually, so we believe in God. The reason why, because not only, because sometimes Christians might say to have faith, without seeing, but also our church shares also like factual evidence how God exists. This is one thing that Christians don't sometimes use, So actually, some factual evidence we use is like history and science, because Christians sometimes like to shy away from science,
right? Because
they think that science does not back up how God exists. But actually, God uses that science to prove that He does exist. It's one thing.
So what's a good example of that? And what's the best example you can think of?
One best example is, we know history, for example. So history itself, we can say is factual. We cannot, some might say that the victor writes history, right? Mm-hmm. But even though the victor writes history, it still happened, right? Yeah. That's why one example is actually about World War II. We all know through history World War II happened. But actually World War II was written 2,000 years ago in the Bible. That's why.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, 2,000 years ago in the book of Revelations, Apostle John prophesied that World War II would happen.
How specific was he, though? Was he like, there are going to be Nazis that come around, they're going to start exterminating Jews?
Right.
He didn't get the specifics down. He wasn't talking about like there's going to be a battle of Stalingrad.
Right.
One problem I have with religious people pointing at prophecies from the Bible is a lot of the times it seems like the prophecies are really vague, and I feel like people are just sort of reading into the prophecy what happens nowadays, and they're like, clearly he was talking about that.
Right.
You see Muslims do this a lot too, where they'll point at a specific what looks like a prophecy from the Quran, and it's some really vague statements, but they'll point to something like quantum mechanics or whatever, and they're like, that's what he was talking about.
Right.
So it just seems to me like a lot of these prophecies are really vague.
Right, I definitely understand that. Well, the prophecies that we share is actually very clear, because actually God uses different types of signs in the Bible. Like so basically the Bible, most people read it like a moral book, but as you kind of ran into, people sometimes try to use it as a book of prophecy, which it is. It's a book of prophecy. But God also speaks in parable or metaphoric, phrase a lot. That's why in the book of Revelations, when he's speaking about specifically World War II, he's speaking in a metaphorical phrase, meaning it's not going to be clearly seen like outrightly anybody can understand it. But it's kind of like, of course, what a metaphor is. It's say if I say it's raining cats and dogs outside. Are you going to go outside and catch a kitty? You're not going to go outside and get a kitty, right? It's raining really hard. It's how God speaks sometimes. Because not everybody's going to understand the words of God. Actually, in Matthew chapter 13, he explains only God's people can understand God's words. Because, actually, if there's God, then also there's Satan. Then if God and Satan is alive, also Satan works against God. So if everybody can understand God's words, that even means evil spirits can understand God's words. And that means God, that's why even those evil spirits can distort God's words. That's why God only allows his words to God's people. But in the book of Revelations, it's easily understood. Actually, if I did show you, you will see specifically how he's talking about World War II. Because in that context, he's speaking about stars falling to the earth and also figs dropping from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. As we know,
sounds very vague to me.
Yeah, if you think about a star, because we know we cannot say this is a literal star. Because if you think about a star, you're in science, of course. We know a star is like a what? It's the sun, right? That's why the star is the sun. Now, if you think about mass itself, does a bigger object fall to a smaller mass?
No.
No, we know the smaller mass falls to the bigger object, right? But he's explaining the stars will fall down to the earth.
My question though is, how do you take that where he's talking about the stars falling to the earth, the fig tree or fig branch or whatever it was? How do you take that and say World War II?
Right.
Why was it not World War I?
Right.
Why was it not the War of 1812?
Right.
How do you specifically go from here's what it says in the Bible to they're talking about World War II? That's where I get confused.
For sure. That's why I was going to explain it. That's why first we have to understand that specific phrase that is not literal. Because as we know, stars cannot fall down to the earth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why. But we need to know what does those stars represent. Because have you ever seen a shooting star before or a falling star? Yeah. At first, when you see that shooting star, scientists say that star is coming to die, right? Yeah, that's why that star is coming to die.
Well, fun fact about shooting stars: they're actually not. It's actually not like a star that we're seeing. These are just tiny particles of dust
exploding.
But because they're moving so fast, that's just a side point. But it's a misunderstanding.
Sure, that's why. Yeah, but that star is exploding. In other words, right? It's coming to die. That's why at first you see the light, but no longer will you see it because it explodes. Yeah, that's why we can say in that context these stars are coming to die. Whatever these stars represent, we know they're not literal stars, but whatever these stars represent, they're coming to die. But also he compares these stars to figs. When shaken by a strong wind, they fall down to the ground. Now we know if we think about an apple or an orange or a fig in general, if it's fallen off of its lifeline and it sits on the ground for a long time, it comes to die, right? That's why both of these examples, God is explaining about something comes to die. Then we need to know, okay, if this is talking about World War II, we need to know, okay, what does the stars represent? Because whatever the stars represent, they're coming to die. That's why in the Bible it explains what the stars represent. In Genesis chapter 15, it explains the stars represent Abraham's offspring. That's why I can show you, but it explains God said to Abraham, he told Abraham to come outside. He says, look up at the stars. And if you can count the stars, he says, indeed, if you can count them, so shall your offspring be. Meaning Abraham's offspring represents the stars. But do you know who Abraham's offspring are, or do you know the nationality of Abraham?
Jews.
Yeah, Jew, exactly. That's why Abraham was a Jew. That's why if he has offspring his offspring is going to be Jews.
So we're talking about the state of Israel then?
Exactly. Well, Jews. That's why the stars represent Jews. But since the stars represent Jews, what are these Jews coming to do? In Revelation chapter 6, what does it explain? These stars are coming to die. Meaning these Jews are coming to die.
Okay, so you think the killing of Jews, that's what that metaphor is expressing. It's actually saying it's a metaphor to explain the killing of Jews during the Holocaust. That's what you're getting at.
Yes, but we cannot pinpoint exactly the Holocaust yet, but we can say these stars represents Jews that are coming to die.
That's a good point because, I mean, there's been a long history of Jews being persecuted. For centuries, there have been all kinds of pogroms and mass killings.
Exactly.
So how do you go from the killing of Jews to World War II?
Exactly. That's why he explained also as figs dropping from the fig tree, because that's the other aspect of it. Then we need to know, okay, what do these figs represent? Because whatever these figs tree represent, they're coming to die as well. But the reason why these figs are coming to die, because it explains in Revelation chapter 6, if you ever wanted to read it, Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 through 13, if you guys ever wanted to read it, it explains these figs are shaken by a strong wind. That's why these figs are coming to die, because of the strong wind. And we need to know, okay, what does the figs represent? In Jeremiah chapter 24, verse 3 through 5, God explains these figs represent exiles from Judah. That's why we know where Judah is located. It's one of the tribes of Israel. That's why these people who are coming from Israel, they represent figs. But we know Israelites come from Israel, Jews. That's why Jews in the Bible represents figs. But also it explains again, these Jews are coming to what? Die. Right? Yeah, that's why these Jews are coming to die, because they're falling off from the lifeline. But why are these Jews coming to die? Because they're shaken by a strong wind. Then we need to know, okay, what does that wind represent in the Bible? In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 11 through 12, he explains this is a mighty wind, of a scorching wind, a very hot wind. But we know if something is being lit on fire, is it caused from nothing? We know a fire is not caused out of nowhere, right? There has to be a reason why that fire started. Then he explains what started that fire in the same chapter, verse 16. He explains the fire actually came from a mighty army. A mighty army started that fire. Meaning actually wind in the Bible represents war, coming from that army, yeah. So a wind in the Bible represents war. Then if wind in the Bible represents war, it explains in Revelations, a mighty wind shook the tree to make the figs fall. Meaning actually what God was trying to explain, a mighty war shook the nation of Israel to make a lot of Jews come to die. And if we can think of history, what is the most outstanding?
The one that stands out the most in terms of Jews?
Exactly.
Okay. I can see how you could read into that based upon how you're drawing on other passages and saying, here's how we can understand that it means this and that. I see where you're coming from, but like I said, it does strike me as just sort of, it seems kind of like a stretch to me to say, you know, let me just put it this way. If I was a god and I wanted to communicate to people there's going to be a war in the future involving Jews, I would just state it outright. I would say, you know, in the year 1938 or whatever, Germany's going to invade Poland. Right. Jews are going to be persecuted. I would just state it very plainly, so it wouldn't be up to debate. You know, so
why does God speak like this?
Why explain it in such convoluted terms?
Exactly.
Where it's so vague, where you have to, you have to make such an effort to understand it. Whereas if he just said, "This is what's going to happen," everyone would be like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
and
of course.
We can just look and say he's either right or he's wrong. You know, it seems like that's a much more straightforward approach to me.
Way straightforward, right? But this is not how God works, because there's a reason why. Like I explained, if God made His plan known to everybody, even the evil spirits, even those who wanted to distort God's words, can do so. If they knew God was going to do this at this time, because there's a reason why God put World War II in the Bible. It wasn't just to know knowledge. Actually, it explains in Revelation chapter 7, someone was going to appear after World War II. He explains an angel from the east will appear after World War II. So if he put, okay, at this year, at this date, World War II will happen, then also he must tell us, oh, this angel from the east will appear after this year or after this date. That means after this year or after this date, anybody can appear to you and say, oh, I'm the angel from the east. Because they knew after World War II happened, guess who has to appear? The angel from the east. This is why God sometimes speaks to us in parables, because if he outrightly told us his plan, then anybody can distort his plan. That's why if I was to read to you the chapter, you can understand, because after World War II, after the stars fall and also the figs fall, it explains this angel from the east will appear with the seal of God.
Let me just ask you this real quick, though. So you said something along the lines of believers are the ones who can make sense of these prophecies because
not believers.
Okay, let me rephrase it and put it this way. So you need to basically understand that God's talking in metaphor to understand that he's talking about World War II. So my question is, let's say there's a religious person who understands what's being talked about in this prophecy. Couldn't we have the same problem where a religious person comes forward after World War II because they understand this passage? Wouldn't we have the same problem where they could come forward and be like, I'm the person that they were talking about? Yeah, so how does that solve the problem?
First, let me make clear of what you said. Actually, I never said that Christians has authority to make understanding of the passage or anything of God's words. Actually, there's only one being, only one person who can understand God's words and explain it to us, who has the correct interpretation. Actually, in Revelation chapter 5, it explains only the root of David can give us the correct interpretation. That's why if we are not the root of David, if we don't know who the root of David is, then we cannot understand God's message. We cannot understand God's words. That's why if they don't have the message coming from the root of David, then it's automatically false. This is why we have so many denominations in this world. That's why, because they don't know the message from the root of David. They don't know who the root of David is themselves. If you was ever to read it, it's Revelation chapter 5, verse 1 through 3. Explains only the root of David can give the correct interpretation. That's why, since only the root of David can give the correct interpretation, if you do not have his interpretation, then automatically it's false. Then you would never understand the Bible.
And could you just explain what the root of David means?
Yeah, so the root of David is a metaphor, because actually Christ is explaining many different he plays many different roles in the Bible. So one time, John the Baptist, as Jesus was walking along, if you wanted to see it, it's in John chapter 1, verse 29, I believe.
You know your verses, man.
Yeah. But yeah, if you ever wanted to see it, John said about Jesus, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. That's why he called him a lamb. But we know Jesus Christ is not a physical lamb. He was he's God. But he's not a physical farm animal, but that's just like a metaphor explaining about Christ. Same thing with the root of David. Also, Christ is explained as about Adam, but he's not literally Adam who ate off the tree. He just fulfilled a specific aspect of Adam's life. Same thing with the root of David. Actually, the root of David is a metaphor explaining about who Christ is, meaning only Christ can give us the correct interpretation of the Bible. If it's not coming from Christ, and if it's coming from a different man, then automatically it's false. That's why if we do not share the message of the root of David, specifically Christ, then we can be shown ourselves as false prophets. That's why in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, it explains who that root of David is. He says himself, I, Jesus, has this testimony to give to you. I am the root and offspring of David. That's why Jesus Christ is the root of David. But as we know, Apostle John, he wrote the book of Revelations after the death of Christ. That's why Apostle John wrote the book of Revelations way after the death of Christ. Now, he was not talking about first coming Christ who must appear. Actually, he was talking about second coming Christ. Meaning if we do not have the correct interpretation coming from second coming Christ, automatically it's false. This is the only reason why I know about World War II, about prophecies in the Bible, because second coming Christ has already appeared.
Let me ask you this. I kind of want to switch gears and get your take on this. Because you mentioned earlier, you talked about how there are so many different denominations of Christianity, and there are just so many different religions in the world. So one of the reasons I don't believe in a specific religion is because I look out at the world and I see that there are so many competing religions. I see that there are Muslims who believe in their holy book. There are people who believe in all kinds of different religions. You have Buddhists. You have people who have, like tribal gods. People are polytheists. And it seems like a lot of this is grounded in geography. Like if you were born in the Middle East, for example, there's a good chance that you would just be raised to believe this because your parents and your community believes it. If you were raised somewhere in like Polynesia, you'd be raised to believe whatever they believe. So why do you think that you being a Christian is the result of more than just you being born into a Christian society, a Christian community, maybe a Christian family as well? Why do you think it's grounded actually in evidence and not just the chance result of geography?
Right. The reason why is because, okay, first, like I said, there's many different denominations in this world. Then the reason why, like, so basically you're basically trying to ask why do I pick the way of Christianity, like off of like evidence, more so I'm not being influenced by my surroundings?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So the reason why is because like I looked into many different religions before I fell into this, but the reason why I followed this way is because, like you said, off of evidence, because because we know no man can tell you what can happen in the future. Actually, you cannot tell about your own life. We don't know what can happen to us. We can die tomorrow, die tonight. We don't know. But, for the Bible to explain specifically what can happen to us in 2,000 years or what's going to happen in the future, specifically in our day and age, God has already explained what will happen. And for me to see that and also see the fulfillment of everything that he has ever spoke of, then I'm foolish to think that I should follow something else. Actually, God already showed me all the evidence I need, speaking of exactly what will happen in the future. That's why God did this throughout his 6,000 years work of redemption. So God worked for 6,000 years to show us that he is true through evidence, through factual evidence, such as specifically prophecy, explaining what will happen. That's why one example I can explain is, I'm not sure if you ever heard of King Cyrus. He was the king of Media and Persia.
I read the Bible a long time ago, but there's so much in there that I don't remember the specifics of that story.
Well, he's not on the Bible. He's not like based on the Bible. Actually, this is history. You can look up King Cyrus. Yeah, he was an actual king of Media and Persia during the Persian Empire. Yeah, but actually, God wrote Cyrus's name like hundreds of years before King Cyrus was even born.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's really crazy. But actually, the reason why.
Let me ask you this though: what would stop somebody from reading this, saying, "Oh, God's talking about some guy named Cyrus," and just naming his kid that to make that prophecy come true? You know what I mean? Like if it was written beforehand, why couldn't he just name his son that, and then he's like, "See, this is what God was talking about." When maybe he's just he's like falsely, presenting his son as his first son. You know what I mean?
That, yeah. So the reason why, in this instance, they didn't name his name Cyrus because of that is because Cyrus. One fun fact: he was actually a pagan. He did not believe in God at all. He did not believe in God at all. But there's a specific prophecy that he must fulfill. That's why even if they name him Cyrus, he must fulfill this prophecy. Then if he's the true King Cyrus who's going to fulfill this prophecy, then his name should be Cyrus. That's why.
So you're saying because he's not a member of that religion, it lends credibility to the idea that it's genuine. Because he's not consulting his own religion and saying, I'm just going to make this become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're saying because he wasn't a member of that religion, that makes it more likely to be a genuine example of prophecy. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and not only that, and also there's a prophecy explaining about what he would do. Also, that's why God already foretold what he would do before he was even born. That's why the prophecy that Cyrus will fulfill is freeing the Israelites out of Babylon. Because Israel was captive to Babylon for 70 years. Yeah, that's why the nation of Israel was captive into Babylon for 70 years, but there's a specific person who would free them. And God already foretold it. It was Cyrus. He already explained all the prophecy of King Cyrus, what he would do. And actually, King Cyrus, exactly fulfilling the prophecy, he freed the nation of Israel from Babylon, and also he destroyed the nation of Babylon.
That's interesting. Yeah. I like that you're picking an example that's not somebody who was a member of that religion. Because like I said, I think it does add a little credibility. King Cyrus, that's an example that I'll look into because it's interesting. One thing I would point out though, you point to prophecy as why you think that as one reason why you think the Bible is genuine and trustworthy.
Sure.
What about members of other religions who say we have prophecies in our book? So if I was talking to a Muslim right now, I would say, what makes you think your religion is the true faith? and they could also point to examples of prophecy
Right.
from their own holy book, or some member
Yeah.
of some sort of like African religion, maybe like Polynesia, what they
Right.
believe there, whatever. People in all kinds of religions have
Right.
examples of prophecy they can point to. So why do you think it's uniquely convincing in your case?
Yeah, actually, God explained. Actually, God boasted in the Bible because God knows no man can tell the future. If He's a true God, then He says specifically in the Bible, He says He called all. Basically, He was calling all gods. He gave them a challenge. He says, "Come and meet me. If you are a true God, then tell me what will happen in the future." But God says, "You guys are silent. You can't tell me. You want to know why? Because you're false." That's why I can't say that the Muslim faith has prophecy. I cannot say that any other faith has knowing prophecy. And if they did, then I would like to, hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they did, then I would like to challenge them. Because actually,
would you be convinced if a Muslim came forward and said, "Here's an example from our holy book"? Would you be convinced by that, or would you think because it's not the Bible, something's wrong with it?
No, I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna like believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it has not yet been proven. That's why it's impossible for someone to tell the future. It's impossible. Only God can do that. As I understand, there are those who don't believe in God. But if for them, if there was a God for them, then He would be able to explain what will happen in the future, specifically down to the T. Of course, there can be like predictions, like I predict this summer that's gonna be like 88 degrees,
Sure.
maybe on a Monday, right? It's prediction. And if it comes true, then you're not going to say, "Oh my goodness, you told the future." It's just a prediction, right? But actually, prophecies explain, okay, maybe exactly next year at 2 o'clock, this will happen like this. You'll be wearing a green shirt, blue shoes, and it's fulfilled because He told the future precisely down to the T. This is how God works throughout the whole Bible. Yeah.
Something else I find kind of confusing about this whole idea of prophecy is it seems like if you write it down beforehand, there's always the possibility that people can just make it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
There's actually, I'm pretty sure there's a passage in the Bible where in the Old Testament they talk about how the Messiah is going to come riding on a donkey or something to that effect.
Right.
And then in the New Testament, Jesus at one point, I'm not sure if Jesus says it or just the authors of one of the holy book, one of the books of the New Testament says this, but it says something like, "And He came riding an ass so that the prophecy was fulfilled." So
Right.
it seems like that's an example where they're just reverse engineering the prophecy and doing exactly what it said because they knew it said that and they wanted to make it look like it came true.
Right.
So isn't there always the problem that something written down hundreds of years ago, people could just do what it says to make
Right.
it seem like it's coming true?
Right. It's definitely, that's definitely a problem that if they do understand the prophecy, then they can try to fulfill it themselves. But there's always a different problem with that. Then we cannot just base someone off of one prophecy. We would have to understand, okay, if someone came claiming that he is second coming Christ, and he says, okay, I'm second coming Christ because I fulfilled this prophecy, then also there's a different prophecy about second coming Christ that he did not fulfill. Then if he did not fulfill that prophecy, then we cannot say he's second coming Christ. That's why that's why the Bible is infinite. We cannot just base something off of just one prophecy. That's why Jesus Christ himself, okay, the reason why he came riding on a donkey, of course, it was written in the past. That's why so he fulfilled that prophecy. But also he fulfilled like thousands of prophecies already through the Bible. That's why he is Christ. He is God. That's why the disciples recognized him as God. It wasn't just because he rode on the donkey. Anybody could ride on the donkey. Actually, it's what he fulfilled through the process of him being baptized, also reigning on his throne, many different years of him living. It's everything that he's fulfilled. This is how we can know if it's a true God or a true Christ or not. It's through all the prophecies of the Bible.
So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about just the general trustworthiness of a lot of what we read in the Bible? I assume because you're Christians, you guys are devout believers.
Yeah.
I assume you guys trust what's written in there. From my perspective as a non-believer, I look at stories like that and I think, how can we confirm it? We weren't there. There's no very convincing evidence that these miracle stories took place. On top of that, we have the other problem I mentioned earlier, how there are other religions with other holy stories, and they say miracles occurred in their religion. So why do you trust what's written in the Bible if we can't go back and confirm it? If there's not the sort of hard evidence that we have when, like, you run a scientific experiment, for example, or even just with more basic historical claims, like things happened thousands of years ago in history. We believe that they happened, but the difference is they're not making extraordinary claims about miracles. They're just talking here about events. Whereas in this case, they're miraculous events. And there's a good Carl Sagan quote where he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So do you think the evidence for these Bible miracles qualifies as extraordinary?
They definitely do. But the first step in order to, believe in those miracles, of course, you would first have to believe in the Bible. You're not going to believe in those miracles if you don't believe in the Bible, right? That's why the first step into believing in the Bible, like I said, we study prophecy, history, and science. Because that's the number one thing. If we run into someone who does not believe in the Bible, but they're more scientific or more, factual, then we study literally that with them. And once they see, oh wow, everything was prophesied in the Bible, the whole world was actually prophesied through Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. The whole world history was. That's why if you ever had the time to sit down and study, I can definitely show you the whole world was prophesied already through Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. And once you see that the whole world was already prophesied before it even happened, then you will come to understand, oh wow, the Bible is true. And if you understand the Bible is true, then you're going to understand everything that was written in the Bible was true. Specifically the miracles, heaven and hell, God and Satan. You're going to understand everything is true if you first understand that first step, that the Bible is true. You're not going to,
I recently read an interesting book that actually talks about the historicity of the Bible, whether it's trustworthy or not. It's written by a New Testament scholar named Bart Ehrman. I can't remember the exact title of the book. It's something... I'm totally blanking on the name, I'm sorry. Okay. But basically what he argues in the book is that there have been so many revisions over time to the holy books. He talks about the process where early on there was a process, because they didn't have photocopy machines or anything, so they had to copy down by hand what was written. Yeah. And he talks about how so many errors were translated into that. Okay. And on top of that, there's the problem where you don't know whether people are just inserting stuff on their own. Right. He gives example of people inserting stuff into the holy books that they inserted for, reasons like they had religious disagreements at the time. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was to reflect their political views at the time. Mm-hmm. So it seems like in the process of creating the Bible, there was a lot of opportunities to insert stuff that's inaccurate. Right. So that's one of the reasons why I have a hard time trusting what's written in there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great statement. That's a lot of people's problems nowadays. That's why they don't believe in the Bibles, because they say, okay, a lot of it's been tampered with, or it's been messed with. But let me give you an example, because actually the Bible, I can say for myself, I do not believe it's been tampered with. The reason why is because, let me give you an example. So nowadays we know there's a lot of believers, right? Christian believers who believe in the Bible. Say if I wanted to write another chapter to Revelation chapter 22, because there's only 22 chapters of Revelations. But say if I wanted to write another chapter, Revelation chapter 23, who do you think would accept my book?
If you just came out with it today.
If I just came out with it today?
It depends how convincing you are. What if you're like one of those super charismatic religious guys who gets a following?
Right. Do you want to know?
No, I see what you're saying.
No. But do you want to know why they want to accept it? Because in Revelation 22, verse 18, it says, you shall not add or subtract from the word of God.
Well, that's coming from a Bible that was established. Wasn't it like in the 14 or 1500s where the Bible that we have today they came together and they decided these are the holy books we're going to put into it. I don't know the exact date, but it was fairly recently where they decided on the holy book.
I know for myself, Apostle John was finished writing the book of Revelations in AD 97.
No, I meant just like when they came together and collected the whole Bible. When was that done? Wasn't it sometime in the 14 or 1500s? Do you guys happen to know?
Yeah, I'm not going to say. I can't say exactly when, but I know for itself that the book of Revelations, the last scroll was Revelations, and that was written in AD 97. Okay. That's why, but if we was to compare specifically the Hebrew Bible, the original text of everything, the Hebrew Bible to the Bible we have nowadays, actually, I'm not sure if you ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I have.
Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So a fun fact behind the Dead Sea Scrolls, a little boy was actually trying to find his lamb one day, trying to find a sheep. But as he was trying to find the sheep, there's a lot of caves. So instead of just running into every cave, to save time, he picked up rocks to throw it. Because, if a sheep hears something, he's going to run out because he's scared. Yeah. So he started throwing rocks inside of these caves. And then all of a sudden, when he threw another rock, he heard some glass break. And he was like, huh? So he walked in there. Guess what he found? He found the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Interesting.
Yeah, but actually, this little boy, he did not find the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He did not know what they was, so he
Good
passed
thing he didn't
it on.
throw it away or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he passed it on to a store, and that store passed it on, and so forth, and then all of a sudden, it made its way to America to a historian, and the historian found out what they was. Actually, he understand this is actually exactly the same copy of the Torah, the original text of the Bible, written in Hebrew. Guess what he did with it? He compared the Dead Sea Scrolls to the books we have nowadays. He compared it, and actually he found out that they did not change one exact word. It was exactly how it was when they had it with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the original text.
When were the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered? Do you know when they were suspected of being written originally?
Yeah, I would have to find that out. I know it was. I'm not gonna say exactly when. I think it's like 1800s, or I know it was kind of recent, more recent than when you guys say like the books was put together. It was more recent than that.
So if it's so recent though,
yeah.
How can we use that as evidence that the books haven't been tampered with before that? Because
the Dead Sea Scrolls was written like so long ago. The Dead Sea Scrolls is actually...
No, that's what I was asking, is when it was actually written.
Oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls? Yeah. Oh, I'm not too sure about that. I know they was the original text. I'll have to look it up. I'm pretty sure it's on Google.
I was just curious about that.
Yeah.
The reason I brought that point up, though, is because... So what was the original point I was making? I got
distracted. Basically because many people...
Oh, yeah, my point was the holy books that we have now, people might be like... If you come forward and said this is a new chapter I'm adding to the book, people nowadays would be like, I don't trust that.
Yeah.
But the reason I brought up when the Bible was put together in that committee where they decided these books were going to put in, these were not. The reason I bring that up is it seems like before that there's a period where people could tamper with it, and maybe they could get away with it, whereas nowadays it might be harder to do that. That's all I was making. It's kind of a small point, but I wanted to move on and I wanted to see if you have any questions for me as a non-believer, if there's anything you guys want to know my opinion on, if there's something you want to present me with that I might find convincing. What are some questions you have for me?
You don't have no questions? Maybe if I had one question. I don't know. So, okay, I actually have a question. So, do you believe in like the Big Bang Theory?
I believe. Yeah. No, go on, Corey.
Yeah, for you at least, how did the world come together? Because we know there has to be some type of start, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
the Big Bang Theory, obviously the origin of the universe, it's a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to understand it. There are a lot of cosmologists and astrophysicists way smarter than me who study this. They seem to have a decent understanding of what's going on. I don't claim to know how the universe itself originated. I think it's a mystery. Maybe we'll have some sort of scientific breakthrough in the future where we'll understand it. So I'm willing to concede that it's possible that the origin of the universe was brought about by a god. I think maybe that's a possibility. Sure, I don't think it's the only necessary explanation. In terms of how the world came about, after the origin of the universe, I think there's a pretty good understanding of how stars form, how planets form. You guys were talking at the beginning of the conversation when you originally knocked on the door about how you guys trust the findings of science. You're not science deniers like some religious people, and that's great. But a lot of modern astronomy points to things like star formation, the formation of solar systems, and they have pretty good models for how this happens. And you can actually look out at the universe, and you can take images of solar systems in different stages of formation. So you can have the protostar, the gas cloud condensing. You have a little ring of planets around it. So in terms of the origin of the Earth, our solar system, I think there's a good understanding. But the origin of the universe, I think it's a big mystery. And
for sure.
It's possible God was responsible, but the reason I don't jump to that as a conclusion is because there have been so many examples in history where people point to things that are mysterious. Things like crop failure, things like diseases, things like how life diversifies. They point to things like that and they say a god must be responsible because we don't have an explanation. Nowadays we know better. We know things like disease are caused by microorganisms. So I just worry if we just jump to God and say God's responsible for this, maybe the same thing will happen in the future where we learn more, we develop a scientific explanation, and I just worry that jumping to conclusions like that might lead to the same result where we learn more and we find out it's actually not the case.
Right.
So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. That's I ran into some basically non-believers. Like my dad, he's a non-believer. He believes only in science and stuff like that. But he's big into like how the Earth was formed and how the universe was formed. So I kind of asked him the same thing, but I'm pretty sure it has to start from something. But specifically, the thing that he says it starts from is actually two molecules coming together. And from that comes the Earth. And so, but you have to think to yourself, okay, two molecules come together. Yeah, that's true. I can't say that didn't happen. But even for those two molecules to even be formed, then where did that come from? That's the thing. That's why there always has to be a start to something. That's why, they say like for the Earth to just come out of nowhere, like the Big Bang Theory to just come out of nowhere, it's actually a lower possibility than a car pieces falling out of the sky, like a Ford Focus, a Ford Focus falling out of the sky and building itself. Actually,
Well, it's
that's
not,
more. Yeah.
It's not that it just came out of nowhere, though. I mean, there was a
Right.
gas cloud, it condensed.
Yeah, even for
So
right.
I don't think it's a matter of pure chance, because there are forces at work in the universe that explain how this could happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it just came together by just like a chance occurrence of molecules happening to like come together and form this microphone or something. It's just gravity attracted particles. They came together according to simple laws. So I don't think it's the same as saying it's like a car coming together spontaneously,
Right.
because these are just really simple laws of nature at work.
Right. I definitely understand that. That's why, but like same thing with the two molecules. I guess you can put it into like the factor of like gas, like clouds, like he was explaining and different. I'm not too sure if you know like all the molecules that was taking place inside of the universe that took, that formed the whole universe. But even for that itself, the gas, clouds, like he was explaining in different parts that work together to form the whole universe, even that had to, come from something. Even the gas clouds had to come from something.
So do you guys think that the origin of the universe is something that needs to be explained by pointing to a god?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. That's why we cannot say like it just came. Because that's what most scientists come down to. Okay, they come down to the gas cloud, or they come down to this, or come down to that, but they cannot explain further on before that. That's why if they was going to rely on science, then they would have to explain further on before that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, like, how the universe came about.
Yeah, it is crazy.
It's a really trippy
profound.
topic.
It's really
People don't think
profound.
about it a lot, but when you just stop and it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's really
like, where did all this
profound.
come from?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's really
like I said, though, I just worry jumping to the religious explanation
definitely see where
could
you're
lead to
coming
that
from.
same problem where, maybe we'll learn more in the future.
Yeah.
But as it stands now, it seems like we don't really know. I just don't feel comfortable jumping to the conclusion that God's responsible for those reasons.
Right.
But I can totally see why people would. It's a crazy mystery.
Yeah.
Who knows how it all came here?
Right.
But
Definitely understand that.
so what else could we talk about? So we talked about the trustworthiness of the Bible. So what do you guys think about young Earth creationists? People who look at the Bible, take it literally. There are people who are science deniers. Where do you think they go wrong? And how are they looking at the Bible in a way that you think is inaccurate?
Yeah, so basically, I look at everybody this specific way. If they don't know who the root of David is, then it's impossible for them to know or even understand the Bible, because it explains in that context who is worthy to open up the scroll or open up the Bible. But the angel explains no one under heaven or even in heaven can explain, what the Bible is speaking about. Meaning no one can open up the Bible. But of course, everybody nowadays can physically open up the Bible, but to spiritually understand it, to have an understanding of the Bible, he explains no one can. But he says, but Apostle John, in the context, he started crying because he understood that if no one understands the Bible, then who can be saved? But then the angel told him, stop weeping, because the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. And he is only the one that can open up the scroll. Meaning only the root of David can open up the scroll. So for those who try to interpret the Bible themselves or really try so hard to understand the Bible, it's impossible to understand it or even know anything about prophecy if we do not know who the root of David is. That's why before I came to this church, the World Missing Society Church of God, I did not have any understanding of the Bible. Like I used to try to read it myself, and I would give up midway.
It's a tough read.
It's hard.
Certain parts, it's hard to get through.
It's really hard. But the only reason why I found this faith is the true faith is because I can now actually understand the Bible because it's so plain to me, because I know who the root of David is. That's why before I actually took a world history class. Actually human history class. Yeah, and they got down to the point of evolution. That's what we started at, evolution. But at that point, I started denying evolution. Like, no, that's not true, because I had a belief in God, but I didn't understand the Bible. So I was like, I don't care how many facts you can bring up about evolution, it's false. But when I came to this church and I asked them about evolution, they actually say, no, it's not false, it's actually true. And
so you used to be a young Earth creationist. You used to be an evolution denier.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, good thing you came around. That's
yeah, I used to be exactly one of those. But
interesting.
When I came to this church, they explained to me exactly how evolution is true through the Bible. That's why it's amazing, because the Bible was written way before evolution. I'm not sure if Darwin, I'm not too sure what time period he was around.
It was about 1840s, 1850s.
Oh yeah, way before. That's why the Bible was written way before Darwin was even created, even thought about. But evolution was already in the Bible. That's why, that's one thing also.
I think it's interesting you say that, because there are some people who disagree with you that are Christians, and they'll say the exact opposite. They point to the Bible and they're like, the Bible proves no evolution. And here you're saying the Bible does prove evolution.
It definitely proves evolution. But because common Christians, they believe, the 6-day creation, that's how long God took to create the world. that the earth only existed for 6,000 years. Because they say, you know, each day can represent 1,000 years. And that's true. That's definitely true. But actually, the 6-day creation, that's actually God working for 6,000 years. So that's actually God telling us he's going to work for 6,000 years. That's not him telling us that the earth only existed for 6,000 years. That's why before that, the earth already existed. There's dinosaurs, you know, there's even dinosaurs are spoken about in the Bible, evolution, different things happened before God worked. But then all of a sudden, God started working 6,000 years ago. Yeah.
I really wish more Christians were like you guys, because you know there are so many Christians I run into. They deny science, and you can't talk to them and have a reasonable conversation with them. I wish more Christians were like you, and they looked at the findings of science and they said clearly this is the case. Here's how we can interpret. Here's how we can look at our Bible and confirm these things. Hopefully that kind of younger creationism is on the decline, because I think it's silly to reject science like that.
It's definitely silly.
Let me ask you this though, because you mentioned how you look to the Bible and you see there's evidence of evolution. I pointed out that there are some people look at the Bible and they say the exact opposite. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about the idea that if a God came forward, he wanted to present us with a holy book, why would he give us a book that leads to so many competing viewpoints, so many contradictory views, where some people say it says this, some say it says the exact opposite, and not just on the topic of evolution, but all kinds of questions. You know, some people on like whether abortion is allowed, their positions on divorce, all kinds of questions. People come to different conclusions, even though they all claim to be Christians. So if I was a God and I wanted to come forward and present a holy book, I would try to make it a lot more straightforward. I would try to make it so there wouldn't be so many contradictions. So why do you think God gave us this Bible that we have now?
So it kind of comes down to the same thing I was talking about. Basically, like the reason why, of course, God will not make his plan known to everybody, like I already explained, you know, because if he did make his plan known to everybody, because think about it, it's kind of like God appearing out of nowhere upon the whole earth. Who's going to not deny God at that time? Who's going to deny God? No one's going to deny God, right? If he appears right up there right now, I'm God in a majestic form, no one's going to deny him. That's why God wants his true believers. That's why God speaks to us in parable, because through that parable, there's going to be two different groups. His true people will understand that parable. These are the eyes that God has opened. But there will be those who do not believe God, and to where the parable is closed. But to understand it, even for those who try to like so many denominations, even though we all read the same Bible, people get different messages out of it. It all comes down to the point of knowing the root of David. That's the most important. It all comes down to. If we want to understand the Bible, you have to know who the root of David is. It explains in Revelation chapter 5. You guys, if you guys wanted to read it, Revelation chapter 5, verse 1 through 3, explains who the root. It explains only the root of David can open up the scroll. That's why if those who have different beliefs than the other one. So if you was to walk up to one pastor, they'll say like this. To the other pastor, they say a totally different thing, because they don't know who the root of David is. It's like,
so you don't think the goal of God writing the Bible was to provide a clear understanding of what he wants us to believe?
Actually, I cannot say his goal was to like distort it, but to Satan's followers, it will seem distorted to them, because they will not try to understand it. They will not try to seek God's wisdom. To themselves, that's why the Bible explains they interpret it to their own benefit, so that it can fit their own use for it, their personal gain. They get a personal gain out of the Bible.
So you think it comes down to each believer to study it, become devout, and only then will they arrive at the correct understanding? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, basically only the root of David, right? Only the root of David. If you really want to know God's true will, God's profound will, then you would have to understand the message from the root of David. You don't have to go to the root of David itself, but there's people like, actually our church is the only church in the whole entire world who knows who the root of David is, because our church was founded by the root of David himself, by second coming Christ. And so if you want to know God's profound will, God's message through the Bible, you would have to get it from specifically God himself, second coming Christ, who founded our church. That's why he's already appeared. Yeah.
Seems like a lot of other denominations would say the same thing about theirs, though, to be fair.
Yeah, that's what they'll try to say, but...
So does it just come down to you having a different theological view on the Bible, they have theirs, or...
Actually, it comes down to who does the Bible testify about.
Right.
That's it. That's why if your church is like testified in the Bible, if your church is talked about in the Bible, or if your church is fulfilling prophecy in the Bible, then we can say, okay, that church is true. That is the true church.
So how hardline are you guys about different denominations? Do you think, like, if people disagree with you on one thing, do you just, like, completely disavow them and have nothing to do with them, or are you guys pretty open-minded?
We're I'm not gonna say we like definitely shut them off. If they have a mind to, you know, talk, or if they have a mind to understand God's will, then we'll definitely talk with them. But you know, our church has a perfect truth. That's why we're not going to go about following different ideas, but we will definitely talk with you and understand your point of view. And if that point of view does not matches with the Bible, then we will show you, and you'll be like, oh wow, this is truth. Then if this is true and the way I was following was false, then you're going to definitely follow the way that is truth. Sure. That's why our church is prophesied in the Bible. That's why our church is one of the only churches that is prophesied in the Bible, but the other church that is also prophesied in the Bible is the Roman Catholic Church. Actually, they're fulfilling a very scary part of the Bible, actually. In Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, God gives us the identity of the Antichrist, if you guys ever wanted to look at it.
So you think the Roman Catholic Church is the Antichrist?
Yes.
Really?
The Pope himself.
That's a pretty bold statement.
The Pope himself is the Antichrist.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, himself. Because the Bible explains prophecy directly down to the T. That's why...
Something we might finally agree on now.
Yeah, that's why in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, if you guys ever wanted to read it, it explains who the identity of the Antichrist is, and also Revelation chapter 13, 17, and 18 explains the Roman Catholic Church is the Antichrist. It's not going to say directly, okay, the Roman Catholic Church, but it's going to show prophecy explaining about a specific organization. And whoever this
matches the description of the Roman Church. Exactly. It's kind of interesting you say that, though, because from my perspective as a non-believer, it seems like you guys in the Roman Catholic Church share a lot of views on some of the core tenets of what you believe.
You think so? What is one?
It seems like it. I mean, you guys believe in Jesus Christ. You believe, I assume, that there's an afterlife. You believe that the Bible is trustworthy. It seems like there's a lot of beliefs in common. So to come out and say that they're the Antichrist,
right.
it seems
amazing.
like a bold statement.
Yeah, it's amazing. You want to know why? Because, you know, in the Bible it explains Satan masquerades himself as an angel of light. He masquerades himself as a child of righteousness, meaning he looks righteous, even though even God explains in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 through 23, though they say to me, Lord, Lord, and call on my name, he explains, they do not do my will. They are evildoers. That's why there will be a church group, there will be church groups who call on the same name we do, who believe in Jesus Christ, but God explains to me, away from me, you evildoer, though they call me Lord, Lord.
So do you consider Catholics to be evil, or do you just think they've been deceived and
I cannot say that
victims?
Yeah, I cannot say like the people themselves are evil, but I can say the organization, specifically what they did during the Dark Ages, that's directly aligning with basically their practices is matching up with the Antichrist, meaning what they practice, how they worship, specifically what they put themselves to be like. They are actually the Antichrist, being used by Satan.
Well, I have to say, with the whole child abuse scandal with the Catholic Church, where they were accused of, molesting hundreds of children, covering it up, it seems like that's the behavior of an organization that, would have some sort of linkages to Satan. So if I was a religious person, maybe I'd be inclined to believe you. I wanted to ask your guys' opinion on the idea of the afterlife, specifically the idea of hell. Do you guys believe in a literal hell where people die, they go to be tortured for eternity? Do you think it's more along the lines of separation from God? How do you guys think about the afterlife, the idea of heaven and hell?
There's definitely an afterlife, definitely. In the Bible, it explains directly what the afterlife looks like. So there was a parable explaining about a rich man and Lazarus. So the rich man, he lived very good here in this life. He didn't focus much about heaven. Actually, he focused on his physical aspects of his life, how to be rich, how to live in luxury. But there was a poor man who only focused on heaven, who was very poor, who didn't have a meal. He actually suffered. The reason why he explains he was poor is because he suffered with Christ. That's why, but these two were separated. The rich man went to hell and Lazarus went to heaven, because Lazarus, he was focused on God, he was focused on Christ. He wasn't focused on his world. He didn't want nothing from this world. That's why, but the rich man, he explained his agony. He explains, Father Abraham, I'm such in agony in this fire. Can you please dip your tip of your finger in some water and put it on my tongue? That's how agonized it is to go to hell. And also God explains it's better for you to cut off one of your arms and enter heaven maimed than for you to go to hell. Yeah, you know the verse, right? And also Revelation chapter 20, if you guys ever wanted to read it, explains what hell looks like. That's why You know, these are those people who do not do the will of God. Specifically, we need to know what God's will is, because many people think that if you act righteous or if you give to charity, you know, stuff like that, oh, I think through this I'll go to heaven. But if that's not God's will, then it's impossible for you to go to heaven, even if you're like the nicest person on this earth. That's why
that doesn't strike me as a very moral system. I mean, I have a couple problems with the way you guys look at the idea of an afterlife and hell specifically. Number one is I just don't think there's convincing evidence to believe in it. I mean, that's one point.
Definitely.
The second issue I have, though, is it's more of an ethical issue with this whole idea of torturing people for not just like a limited period of time, but torturing them forever for believing the wrong things. Because, I mean, you just said that people could live a good life, people could be a good person, but if they don't believe the right things, they're going to go to hell. That doesn't strike me as an ethical system at all. I think even if these people were monsters, even if they were doing terrible things, the idea of punishing people for an infinite period of time for finite crimes strikes me as something that can never be a moral system, because there's no finite crime that can justify infinite punishment, let alone infinite torture as that punishment.
Right.
So this whole idea of hell strikes me as something that, you know, maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't, but I just can't imagine there being a God who cares about us, who's all-knowing, and who thinks this is a good system to put in place to torture people forever. It just strikes me as wrong.
That's why, like, the first step into believing in all these things I'm talking about, of course, you would have to understand how the Bible's fact. You're not going to believe in hell if you don't think the Bible's fact. If you don't think the Bible's true or the Bible's fact, you're not going to believe in it at all. That's why this is the only reason why I believe in hell and heaven, is because I found out the Bible's actually fact. But, you know, to think, if you don't understand the reason why, you know, there is a hell, if you don't understand that reason, then you'll think to yourself, oh, wow, that is like really messed up. Ooh, that if God really exists, then he's a really bad God. I don't want to like believe in that type of God.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, definitely. But there's a reason why, you know, God puts us through that. Because actually God, if we understand God, you know, what happened fully, then we would understand why God is so merciful. The reason why is because before this earth, actually, you know, actually humans, all of us here on this earth, 7 billion some people here on this earth, actually we was all in heaven. You know that story about Adam and Eve? Yeah, that was actually a story about mankind being casted down out of the Garden of Eden, actually casted out of heaven, coming down to this earth because we sinned against God.
You think that's a metaphor for all people?
Yeah, all people. Yes.
So it's not exclusive to Adam and Eve? You think it's just general about everyone?
Yeah. So, you know, prophecy, so God uses sometimes, so basically like a lamb. So a lamb was sacrificed in Exodus. That was a literal lamb. But that lamb was talking about Jesus. So that lamb represents Jesus. So we cannot, so Adam and Eve, they was real people, but we cannot say that only represents real people. We cannot represent, you know, mankind. But actually a prophecy can be fulfilled once, twice, and 3 times. That's why that's also talking about mankind. And also Adam and Eve is talking about something else as well. But it can be used for different aspects. On a specific aspect of Adam and Eve, that's who it's talking about. If you understand what I mean.
You describe it as merciful, though. I don't see what's merciful about torturing people forever.
I was going to explain.
Yeah, sure.
Because, you know, actually, the sin we committed in heaven was so grievous. Actually, from heaven, we was actually supposed to go straight to hell. You want to know why? Because think about it. Here on this earth, if you commit a crime like littering, like if you like threw some trash outside right now, do you think you'll be put to death for that?
Hopefully not.
No, you
wouldn't.
Depends
where we're at in the world, I guess. Maybe in North Korea.
You think so? Maybe in North Korea, right?
No, I think it'd be a ridiculous punishment. Yeah,
really ridiculous. That's why no one's going to kill you for throwing trash outside. But what if you committed murder? What do you think?
Probably life in prison.
Definitely life in prison. Took a couple more lives than serial killer. Put to death, right? Same thing. Then, you know, actually in heaven, why do we all come down to this earth to come to die? Actually, we have the same sentence as that of a death row inmate. All of us here on this earth, we all come to die. We're just waiting on our time to come to die. That's why same thing with a death row inmate. They're living in a prison until they come to die. Same thing with us. That's why we must have committed some type of sin in heaven.
So you think Earth is analogous to a prison? Is that what you're getting at?
Definitely a prison here on this earth. That's why in heaven we committed a sin. You know what we try to do? God explains in Ezekiel and also Revelation chapter 12. If you wanted to read it, Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 through 9, he explains Satan and his angels try to take God's throne. There was a war in heaven, and they try to kill God. That's why his angels try to take God's throne. They try to rule over all of the universe. Because of that, God, actually, he had a right to kill everybody here on this earth. But God's so merciful, actually. God sent us down to this earth to, guess what? Realize what you did in heaven. And if you don't realize,
give us a chance,
give us a chance.
Redeem ourselves.
Exactly.
I see where you're coming from, but here's the problem I see with that. I wasn't involved in that. I wasn't there. I wasn't one of Satan's henchmen riding a horse with a sword trying to take over a throne.
You don't think so?
I don't remember doing that.
Right.
So why am I being held collectively responsible for something I didn't participate in?
Right. So, actually, no matter how much we say something is not true, so let me give you an example. We know the earth is a sphere, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So no matter how much I want to say, no, the earth is flat, doesn't matter how much you believe that. What is the earth? Is it a flat? No, it's a sphere. Yeah. Same thing. No matter how much I say, oh, I was not there. It explains in that verse that Satan's angels was casted down to this earth. So anybody here on this earth, they was following Satan. They was trying to destroy God himself. That God.
So you're saying I was there?
Yeah, everybody was there. 7 billion, all these 7 billion people here.
That's a pretty remarkable claim.
Exactly. That's why all of these people here on this earth, they was actually used by God. I mean, they was actually used by Satan.
Why don't I have a memory of this, though, if I was there? Exactly. I mean, if I had a memory of it, I could understand being held responsible. Exactly. But since I don't remember it.
Because, there was a story in the Old Testament. It's called the City of Refuge. That's why the City of Refuge, it contained 2 type of murderers. There was a unintentional murder and there was a intentional murder. Someone who wanted to do it on purpose, and someone who didn't want to do it on purpose. But that was actually a story about us in heaven. There are those who was unintentional, who did not mean to, who did not, have the thought to. They was just deceived by Satan. They did not, want to. And there was those who actually wanted to kill God. This is why God does not give us the memory. Because if we have the memory of what we did in heaven, then automatically we can be like, okay, then that's true. Heaven is true, then hell is true, then I don't want to go there. Exactly. That's why God erased our memory. Now God is testing us through our actions, through how we talk, through what we believe in, through if we follow God's will, if you was unintentional or if you was intentional. This is why God only speaks to us in parables, because there will be those who believe in God and show themselves, okay, I am unintentional. I did not intentionally kill you. That's why I follow you right now. God, I'm sorry, like that, who repent. And there will be those who is intentional, who do not, want to follow, who do not want to do God's will. This is how God chooses. This is how God sees. Okay, what was your true mindset in heaven? Did you really try to take my throne, or was you just deceived by Satan? Intentional and intentional.
It's an interesting outlook. I've actually never heard of this, because one counter argument I sometimes hear to the idea of heaven and hell is presumably God wants all of us to be in heaven. That's his goal, right? And one of the counter arguments I hear is, why not just create all souls in heaven to begin with? Seems like you guys already have a way around that argument, because you say he did create us in heaven and we got cast out. So it's kind of interesting that you guys already have a way around something that I was going to bring up.
Yeah, God can create robots, right? God can create robots to serve him and everything. But the reason why God did not just make everybody to go to heaven is because God wants us to understand his true love. That's why, Adam and Eve, God loved Adam and Eve, mankind. God loved them. But, in order to know, because in that context, they was just following the law. Mm-hmm. God told them not to eat off the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So they're scared. Okay, I'm not going to eat off of it. I'm just under the law. But if I decide to disobey this law, then I cannot be in heaven any longer. But through that, God placed the tree of knowledge of good and evil and created the serpent. Why did God create the serpent? It's because God wanted to work through that. God wanted them to understand his love. Because guess what? Say if we ate off the tree of knowledge of good and evil and we're casted out, now we're about to suffer death. But if God came to us and gave us life, then we can understand God's love for us. This is why God does not just create us perfect, or does not just try to, because God can make a perfect robot if he wants to. But the reason.
So you're saying the reason that it's not super clear to us that a God exists is because God doesn't want to create robots who are just mindlessly believing. He wants people to come to this conclusion on their own. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Not basically on their own, but understand basically God's grace. They're not going to basically try to mathematics come up on their own, but basically through they'll understand God's grace, of coming down to this earth and saving me from what I once was about to suffer. You had grace on me to allow me to have a second chance. So now I truly understand your love. And now instead of serving you like a robot, I have to do like this, I'm gonna serve you out of my love, out of my compassion, because you saved my life from what I was about to suffer.
I don't see why it's necessarily robotic, though. Let's say I was a god and I wanted people to believe. I could present convincing evidence to them.
Right.
But it wouldn't be robotic. It's like my belief in the idea that dinosaurs exist. It's not robotic. It's just I see that there's convincing evidence and I believe it.
Right.
So why do you jump? Why do you jump to people are robots?
Right. Well, it's not. Yeah, I wasn't explaining in that context. It's the reason why God doesn't make everybody believe is because, like I said, there's intentional or unintentional murder. Everybody will be saved. That's not God's will. God's will, of course, is not going. Everybody will not be saved. Only His true believers will be saved. That's why, of course, we all believe in dinosaurs. We see the bone. We still got a living dinosaur nowadays, right? That's why we can see, dinosaurs existed. That's factual evidence. So no one's going to say there's dinosaurs did not exist. And if they do, then they're being chewed out because guess what? I'm going to show you fact. I'm going to show you evidence, stuff like that. But if God did the same thing, then who would say I don't believe in God? No one would say I don't believe in God. That's why.
What's wrong with that, though?
What's wrong with that? Actually, as we know,
if the goal is to get everyone to believe,
yeah.
why not make it so that this knowledge is super accessible? Because if that was my goal as a creator, that's what I would try to do. Because
there's two sides. There's Satan and also there's God. Which side do you want to stand on? This is why God blocks it. This is why God is not openly, explain it. Because God wants to see what side do you truly want to be on. And if you truly want to be on my side, then you're going to understand everything, God wants you to understand. But if you don't want to be on my side, then, you're not even going to try to understand it. You're going to lead to other things.
What if I would want to be on his side if I knew better, but I just don't think there's convincing evidence. It's not like I'm willfully worshiping Satan or whatever. I just don't think there's good enough reason. So I don't see why it's binary. It's like you're either with me or against me. It seems like there's more to it than that. It's some people that are like, well, I think there are good stories in the Bible and so forth, but I just don't think there's good enough evidence. So it seems to me like it's just too unrealistic to point it as you're either a follower of Satan, you're on his team, or you're with God.
Like it's definitely like how you explain. If they have a mind to understand it, they're definitely going to be saved, 100%, because they're going to understand exactly everything that they wanted to understand. And after that last question gets answered, that's when basically their heart works or their mind works. Okay, do I really want to believe in this, or do I just want to not believe in it? That's what it comes down to. That's why if a person came up to me today, like you, for example, say if you came up to me today and you said, okay, I want to believe in God, but there's no factual evidence. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to work my whole time with you trying to give you factual evidence. And if what I have is not enough, then if you still wanted to study, then I'm going to give you to someone who has even more knowledge of the Bible. Then like that. So I don't believe like there's going to be a point to where if someone wants to believe in the Bible or if someone wants to believe in God, then God's going to block it to them. Actually, if they want to believe in God or if they really want to believe in God but they have no factual evidence, then I believe God will open up that factual evidence that they're looking for so that they can believe in God. That's why, but everything will not be open to everybody. That's why, like I said, there's a verse in the Bible that explains in Matthew chapter 13, verse 13, 10 through 13, explains God speaks in parables. He speaks in hidden messages, metaphoric meaning, because this parable contains knowledge of heaven. But if everybody had knowledge of heaven, that means even Satan can have knowledge of heaven, meaning he can have a chance to go back to heaven, meaning the same process will happen again, where sin will happen in heaven. But God explains it will not happen like that. That's why God explains in parables, because these parables contain knowledge of heaven. But God only explains there will be two groups. There will be those who see and those who will not see. These people that see, that don't see, it explains, even though I show them, he says, those seeing, they do not see. Those hearing, they do not hear or understand. Meaning I'm showing you exactly what's happening. But though you're seeing, you do not see. You do not understand. Even though I show you factual evidence, even though I show you proof how God exists, or even though I show you prophecy, you do not see. Because it's not meant for you to see. It's only meant for God's people.
Let me get back to something you said earlier, because I thought it was interesting, and I think it definitely hits at where we disagree about the idea of heaven and hell, this idea of an afterlife being wrong from my perspective. Something you mentioned is there could be a person who lives a good life, they're a decent person, but they still end up going to hell. That just strikes me. That strikes me as wrong, and I don't see how that could be viewed as ethical. Another question I had for you is, this is kind of along those same lines, is how could any finite crime possibly justify infinite punishment?
Okay, yeah. So, actually, I'm going to answer the first question. Mm-hmm. So, basically, God will not judge you off of your, of course, God is going to judge off of good deeds, but basically, you're supposed to do God's will. He explains in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 to 23, the reason why these people, even though they say Lord, Lord, or do many different things, even these people perform miracles. That will go to hell. These people will perform miracles. But he explains the reason why they're doing that is because they did not do Father's will. Meaning they do not do God's will. That's why, actually, if we're doing God's will and also doing good deeds, then we'll be even more blessed in heaven. But if we're not doing Father's will, but we think, okay, giving to like this, or like showing someone like physical love, or trying to trying to find a different way to go to heaven other than Father's will, then God explains you will not go to heaven. You must do God's will, Father's will.
What about just being a good person, though?
Yeah.
It just strikes me as wrong to punish people who we both agree are good.
Right.
Let's say there's a good person, they're very charitable, they're nice to everybody, they live a good life, and they still end up going to hell. I don't think there's a way that you can spin it where punishing them with infinite torture, if we both agree they're a good person.
Right.
I don't see how we can justify that as ethical.
Yeah, first let me explain the hell process. So it explains in Luke, I forget the verse. This is one verse. I would have to, it's on my phone.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah, but anyways, that's why there's a verse in Luke that explains, those who know Father's will, they will be beaten with many blows, and then they'll perish. But those who don't know Father's will and don't do Father's will, then they'll be beaten with fewer blows, but then they'll perish, meaning they will not any longer exist, meaning they will not be punished for infinity. Those who will be punished for infinity, he explains in Revelation chapter 20, are false prophets, those who perform signs, basically false prophets, those who claim to believe in God.
So you think these people we're talking about, these good people who simply don't believe, you don't think they go to hell to be tortured? You think there's some sort of alternative punishment where they just...
Yeah, alternative punishment to where they don't know God's will. Meaning, even they had the chance to receive God's will, or they did not, understand it, and they did not follow it, to where they will be punished and no longer exist. Meaning they will not go through that process.
No torture, though.
Yeah.
No torture, that's good.
Yeah. But there will be those, who knows Father's will, but they do not do it. Meaning they will be beaten with many blows, as the Bible explains, and then they'll be destroyed forever.
So it's pretty much only the worst of the worst, in your opinion, who do get the punishments of infinite torture and hellfire. For
sure, that's like the really worst of the worst. But even to be punished in period is really bad, because actually heaven is something we cannot explain. Heaven is like no eye has seen, no ear has understood. And so, but heaven is something much more better than this earth, because if we think about this earth, we can come to understand it as a prison through even looking at a prison itself. So if we look at a physical prison here on this earth, we know one thing: we're confined. That's the first thing we think about. Prison, we're confined. We cannot go anywhere. We're limited on what we can do here in prison, right? Same thing with this earth. You're limited, right? You're in this body. You cannot fly. You cannot do everything you want.
Maybe I can.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
You cannot do anything you want. Basically, you're in a three-dimensional world. But in the fourth or fifth dimension, you can do different things. You can do more things. But here on this earth,
sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely, it sounds really cool. This is actually what the fifth dimension. This is actually what heaven is like. It's actually the fourth or fifth dimension. That's heaven. That's why the fourth dimension, basically, we can understand the past, the future. We're not in a time zone. We can understand everything as it is. And also, we're like transparent. We're not confined to anything. Here on this earth, we're confined. We have to drink. We have to eat. We have to sleep. We're confined to this body. This is a prison. Our body itself is a prison. That's why we cannot do anything outside of what our body can do. Outside of that, then it's impossible.
Let me ask you this, though, to return to those worst of the worst who do end up being tortured with hellfire. To get to my earlier question that I asked, how do you think that there are finite crimes that justify infinite punishment?
Finite crimes. So infinite punishment is those basically false prophets. Those who are supposed to be leading God's people actually, but they're leading God's people astray to where they're not showing them how to go to heaven, meaning they're actually showing them how to do exactly opposite of what God wants them to do. That's exactly what God explains as a false prophet.
And you think that justifies being tortured forever?
Yeah, for sure. Those who lead God's people astray, who are not leading them to heaven, God is just. God is not going to punish anybody unjustly. That's why if God calls that just, then of course that's just. That's why those who do not do God's will, basically, God's will is to love others. But he explains, love others as I have loved you. That's why we have to think, okay, how did God love us specifically? How did God love God's people? Well, God loved God's people by dying for us. That's God's love. He says he's love others as I have loved you, meaning we're supposed to literally give life to others. You know how Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, he died so that he can give life for others. Same thing for us nowadays. We have to literally sacrifice ourselves, not like literally like, yeah, but literally we have to really like work really hard so that people's lives can be saved. This is the only reason why I knocked on your door today, because I understood that God's will for us is to love others as he has loved us. Because if we're doing that, then automatically we're being led to heaven, and also those who we are trying to show love to, they'll be led to heaven as well. This is God's will. But if we're not showing love, then automatically then we're not, following God. God is love. Then what's the opposite of love? Even though I say I love you, but if I don't want your life to be saved, then that's a false love. That is fake love. That is hate. If I don't want you to be saved, if I don't want you to go to heaven, then that's hate. Then God explains those people who do not love, then if they don't want you to go to heaven, if they don't try to lead you to heaven, will of course perish.
I was thinking maybe we could cut it short here. We've been going for about an hour.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Flies, right?
You start going and it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
I just had one more question that I want to ask, just kind of like a silly one.
Yeah, it's cool.
Do you guys have any stories about like knocking on people's doors and then doing something outrageous, like throwing water balloons at you or threatening you, or what are some stories you have from knocking on doors?
It was one time I was preaching and I knocked on someone's door, but then all of a sudden a little boy opened up the door. But this little boy, he was naked. I was like, what the? But he opened up the door like he was surprised, like he himself forgot he was naked. He was like, oh, and closed the door. Yeah, it was really crazy.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, do you guys have any last questions for me before we call it a night?
I don't, but if I would like to.
Yep.
If you guys had any questions at all, or if you had any more questions, we're called the World Mission Society Church of God. We have over 7,000 churches and over 2.5 million members. We most likely have a church established in your area wherever you're located. So if you did have any questions, you can definitely look us up on Google. It's called the World Mission Society Church of God, and you're definitely welcome to come and study. And any questions you have, you can definitely be answered through the Bible.
Cool. Well, this was a good conversation. Like I said when you guys knocked on the door, I just really like talking to people I disagree with, see where they're coming from, explain my position, hear where you guys come at these issues from. Yeah. So I enjoyed this conversation. Maybe we could do it again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, thanks. I
nice to meet
had a
you.
good time. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And thank you all for watching and listening. Take care.